Watch this video and then let's talk about it.
50 years ago, or 200 years ago, when the blacks were slaves, did they ever go to Washington, D.C. and have a rally 200 years ago to protest slavery? Did they? No. What did they do? Well, a lot of good people in the plantations would say, hey, it's wintertime. Let us help build a church for you, dear folks. And they loved them and taught them how to read so they can read the Bible. And here's what the blacks did about 150 years ago. They humbled themselves. They prayed. They sought God's face and they turned from their wicked ways, and God made slavery illegal through several white presidents, right?
All right, so here's the truth. Slavery did not end because enslaved people humbled themselves and prayed. And it did not disappear the moment a law was signed. Slavery was challenged. It was challenged through resistance. It was challenged through rebellion, organizing, and war. And then it shifted into new forms that lasted long after 1865. And so what's at stake right now is memory, because when history gets softened, oppression starts looking like kindness and resistance starts looking like silence. I'm Dr. Michael H. Ford, and let's talk about what you just saw. First, the pastor asked whether enslaved people ever went to Washington, D.C. to rally. Enslaved people could not safely protest in public the way we imagine today. Public assembly could have meant capture, punishment, or death. But black political resistance absolutely existed. Free black leaders petitioned Congress for decades. National black conventions began in 1830, and slavery in Washington, D.C. was abolished in 1862 after sustained political pressure, not passive prayer. Next, the claim that plantation owners lovingly taught enslaved people to read the Bible. The system was built to prevent that. After uprisings like the Stoner Rebellion in 1739 and Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831, many southern states passed laws criminalizing black literacy. Enslaved people learned anyway, secretly from one another, because reading meant power. Then the claim that black people turned from their wicked ways. That flips morality. Slavery was the evil. Enslaved people resisted through escape, sabotage, revolt, abolition, organizing, and military service. Nearly 200,000 black men fought for the Union during the Civil War to help dismantle the system holding them captive. Now the part that often gets skipped. The 13th Amendment in 1865 abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. That exception enabled the black codes, convict leasing, and forced labor well into the 20th century. Later,
Alright, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises to Yahweh Ba'Shem Shah Ba'Shem Kudash, the Beloners, my apostles and elders, great millstone. They're doing even well. Peace and blessings be unto the elect. This is Brother Dawodah from GMS Detroit Camp, coming at you with another video through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'Shem Shah Ba'Shem Kudash. Today I want to do another transit. Title of this video will be He's Got Slavery All Wrong. And Lord's will, this video will be edifying to the elect. And you saw the opening clip, which I know there's a little bit more. I'll play the rest of that later, Lord's will. But I definitely wanted to touch on a couple things that got mentioned, especially pertaining to, that devil saying that, slavery, or during slavery, they, taught slaves, the Bible, as a kindness and not so many words, which is complete and utter. It's a complete and utter lie. See, they allowed certain slaves to be, so-called pastors, but they were taught on what to teach. Here it is. You have the slave Bible, wherein they took out a lot of the parts of the Bible that spoke about, standing up against, affliction and standing up against your oppressor. All right. Like the Exodus, that was taken out for sure. Amongst many other different scriptures that speaks about, rising up against your oppressor, they took all that stuff out and gave you the slave Bible. And then they taught the slaves the plantation Christianity. So a servants obey your masters. It tell you to obey your masters. Which they don't understand what that scripture means, but they use that doctrine, right, that wacky breakdown of that scripture in order to further their oppression over the so-called Negro slaves. So they didn't teach Jake the Bible in order to free them, because if they taught them the truth, Jake would have rebelled overnight, or immediately rather. So that's not the case. But leave it to the devil to twist the truth, all right, and make a terrible thing seem like a kindness. And that's what the devil does. He can't help himself but to be the devil. All right, the scripture says, can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leopard his spots? Then may ye do good that are accustomed to doing evil. And Esau, he's accustomed to doing evil, which is why he speaks evil. He speaks wickedness. Scripture says he speaks wickedly concerning oppression. Here it is, you bring up your oppression. And what does Esau say? Well, you know what? That's because you ain't working hard enough. Oh, the reason why you broke is because you need to get a job. But they don't look at all the other different things that have oppressed you that prevent you from doing so. Because they don't care.
Came sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and
Yeah, directly after slavery, at this whole sharecropping thing, which Esau monopolized off of Jake Steele. Because remember, even after the slaves were emancipated, not necessarily freed, but emancipated. Emancipation means to switch from one hand to the other. So when you think about it, the South, they were making boatloads of money off of free slave labor. But then you had the North, that had to get built up. So directly following slavery, you had a lot of slaves go up north and work in the factories. And they made a lot of money off of Jake, And then moreover, a lot of those Jakes that were so-called freed, which they were really emancipated, they had nowhere to go. They had nowhere to go. So you had a great portion of them actually stay upon their plantations because that's all they knew. You can't just set people free and then not tell them where to go. It's like, okay, I'm free, but free to go where? And free to do what? And moreover, you had the Jim Crow laws that further afflicted Jake. All right? So here it is, they love to say, well, we set y'all free. Be happy. Well, no, look at all this stuff that you did to us. Even after we were so-called set free. Directly following slavery, the KKK was established. So look at that. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? They don't like to talk about that. Here it is. You had redlining, right? You have the saying, there goes the neighborhood. When Jake moves into a so-called white community, the prices of all the property upon the block goes down. And never recovers. Never recovers. And these things were done, to make Jake look bad and to punish and afflict Jake. Because best believe those other residents in that neighborhood, they didn't see Jake as being a good addition to the neighborhood. That pissed them off because the value of their house just went down. Because this so-called Negro just entered their zip code and so happened to buy a house on their block. Look up redlining. Look up Black Bottom Detroit. Look at all these different things that Esau has done in order to show his hatred. And that's why the scripture says, because thou hast had a perpetual hatred. All right? He's always had this hatred. You go into that word perpetual pursuant to Ezekiel 35:5. That word there is hatred of old. All right, when you go into the blue letter. It's either 35:5 or 35:4 of the book of Ezekiel. Because Esau's had this hatred going all the way back to the garden, going all the way back to Cain and Abel, all the way back to Jacob and Esau, and it's playing out now between the so-called white man and the tribes of the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latin Native Americans. And there's a lot of foreigners, Not say so-called white, because it's really an Edomite thing. It's not, some of our people that look so-called white, I only say that for the sake of edification. But this is what they do. Now, what you have going on right now is you have this guy, DJ Trump. He's, removing the different statues of, or memorials, if you will, of the atrocities that the so-called white man has done. But just because you take down a statue or a memorial, that doesn't stop the fact that you did these wicked acts. And that's one of the plans of these international bankers, which is to try to erase history and remove anything that makes them look bad. I forget what documentary that information is listed in. That's one of their plans, nevertheless. You hear, or rather you've heard of the different things that they've done, trying to erase history. So here's some of that.
They loved them and taught them how to read so they can read the...
So here it is. If you love the slaves, why did you have them? Isn't that an oxymoron? You can't say you love somebody. The scripture says love worketh no ill toward his neighbor. All right? You can't say you love somebody, but you're doing wicked things unto them. That's not love. Come on now. Scripture says, who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? No, not one. All right? You can't say that you're being righteous, but all your actions are wicked. That doesn't make any sense. But they loved the slaves, so they taught you the Bible. Oh, the hell they didn't. But this is a devil for you.
Or 200 years ago, when the blacks were slaves, Did they ever go to Washington, D.C. and have a rally 200 years ago to protest against?
Do you realize that he's blaming Jake? He's saying that this is your fault because you didn't get together and protest and go to Washington, D.C. Because if you did that, you would have been set free. Oh. Jeremiah 30:16 is going to be a beautiful day. Moreover, when you look at this guy, you can tell he's bugged the hell out. He don't care about you Jakes. Moreover, if all the Jakes tried to get together, first off, Jake needed a license in order to leave the plantation. You needed a permit. You know, what would they say to Jake? Where's your papers, boy? You know, you had to have permission from the slave master in order to leave the plantation. You couldn't just walk out and leave. And moreover, how the hell would they know where to go? How would they know how to get to Washington? This is just the works of this is just the devil here.
Slavery. Did they? No. What did they do? Well, a lot of good people in the plantations would say, hey, it's wintertime. Let us help build a church for you, dear folks. And they loved them and taught them how to read so they can read the Bible. And here's what the blacks did about 150 years ago.
And again, if they were so good and righteous, why did they have slaves to begin with? Don't you know you got to pay for that? The scripture says, he that doeth wrong shall receive from the wrong which he have done. And there is no respect of persons. So
They humbled themselves. They prayed. They sought God's face and they turned from their wicked ways.
But if you ask this devil, how does the Most High look? He's gonna squirm and, oh, well, he's white, or he had no color. But then you try to show him the scripture where it says that he does have color, then he's not gonna believe that because he's the devil.
God made slavery illegal through several white presidents, right?
All right, so here's the truth. Slavery did not end because enslaved people humbled themselves and prayed. And it did not disappear the moment a law was signed. Slavery was challenged through resistance, it was challenged through rebellion, organizing, and war, and then it shifted into new forms that lasted long after 1865. And so what's at stake right now is memory, because when history gets softened, oppression starts looking like kindness and resistance starts looking like silence. I'm Dr. Michael H. Ford, and let's talk about what you just saw. First, the pastor asked whether enslaved people ever went to Washington, D.C. to rally. Enslaved people could not safely protest in public the way we imagine today. Public assembly could have meant capture, punishment, or death. But black political resistance absolutely existed. Free black leaders petitioned Congress for decades. National black conventions began in 1830, and slavery in Washington, D.C. was abolished in 1862 after sustained political pressure, not passive prayer. Next, the claim that plantation owners lovingly taught enslaved people to read the Bible. The system was built to prevent that. After uprisings like the Stoner Rebellion in 1730,
Slaves that got caught reading the Bible were killed. If you got caught reading, you were whipped. If you got caught reading the Bible, you were killed.
and Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831, many southern states passed laws criminalizing black literacy. Enslaved people learned anyway, secretly from one another, because reading meant power. Then the
certain of them did. The majority did not learn how to read. You know.
And forced labor well into the 20th century. Later came sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and exclusion from wealth building. Different systems, same control. And finally, language matters. Saying the blacks reduces people to a category, not a community.
And we're not even black, we're Israelites. So with that, all praises, honors, and glories be to Yahweh, Shabbat, Shalom, my apostles and elders, peace and blessings to the elect. Shalom.